Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining the AABE Greater Boston Energy Roundtable, transitioning to a clean energy future. We are so glad that you've joined us this afternoon. I am Shalea Morissette, president of the Greater Boston chapter of the American Association of Blacks in Energy. Today, we have a phenomenal group of women that are here to share their knowledge and insight to the clean energy transition with DE&I in mind. And so with me today, I just have some of my favorite people. First, I have Tara Spann, Chief People and Strategy Officer at Mentor National. I also have with us Donna Daniels, Secretariat Director of the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for the Executive Office of Health and Human Services for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. We also have Ruth George, Supervisor of Equity, Strategic Partnerships, and Workforce at Eversource Energy. And lastly, we have Tamika Jacques, Senior Program Director of Workforce Development at Mass CEC. Thank you all for being with us today. I'm going to jump right in. So let's start with mentorship. Tara, I know you and I have talked extensively about what it's like to be a Black woman in energy and have mentors that don't necessarily look like you. And how do we navigate that? What are your best tactics and what's the mindset that we have to be in as we start with that?
Thank you. First of all, thank you, AABE, for inviting me. And thank you also for having this conversation. So yeah, I mean, mentoring is a tool really that can be used as a strategy to support employee retention in organizations. It also increases employee engagement, fosters personal and professional development. And my organization, Mentor, has advised many companies on how to start and improve their mentorship initiatives. And again, we do look at it as a lens, if you will, for employee retention. Staff satisfaction has gone up for those that are involved in mentoring initiatives. It is really a power to increase diversity and belonging in the workplace. So in addition to providing consulting on mentorship initiatives, my organization, Mentor, believes it is really important to also train employees on what it means to have a mentoring mindset in the workplace. And again, we've achieved great results in doing so.
And so as we go into this, right, we know that energy is a male-dominated industry, right? And I consider myself young. So how do I go about, or for those on the line, how do we go about approaching those white males to be our mentors? What's the best strategy for that?
Yeah, white men who, and generally white men who have daughters, right, have generally discovered their nurturing and empathetic qualities, which enable them to have a mentoring mindset in itself. Personally, I have mentors for different aspects of my life, and they range from white men to racially diverse women. There's a great value in and much to learn from those that are different from ourselves. We know this is what we do in DE&I. And from a professional perspective, in the places and spaces that I've occupied, white men have successfully navigated their careers to the highest of levels. So while I support, cross-racial mentoring relationships, I also believe racially diverse women in particular need to see people who look like them in high places.
Absolutely. That's definitely a fair assessment of the situation and how to go about it. This is really a question for all of you. Some of you have children, some of you don't. And being a woman and being, my daughter's 4 years old, how do we manage it, right? That work-life balance of wanting to be front and center of the pack moving forward. But also balance that if you don't have children yet, you are sometimes seen as you can carry the load because the other moms don't, right? So Donna, I'll start with you first.
Wow. So we're going back a little bit for me because my daughter is actually a college graduate, environmental justice graduate. But, I think you just have to know yourself and set your personal boundaries and really understand what your capacity is. I mean, I think I tend to work myself really hard. And there just came a point, I was a single parent, and there just really came a point where I had to really draw lines and say, okay, there's some of these things that I'm just not going to be able to do. How do I prioritize, or how do I structure my time such that I can accomplish what I need to accomplish, what I want to accomplish um, in a reasonable period of time, and not trying to do everything at once. And I think, especially I find for women of color, we tend to drive ourselves so hard. Many of us tend to be overachievers. That if we could give ourselves a little grace, I think it goes a long way. And I think our daughters can learn a little from that.
Absolutely. Agreed. Ruth, what's your take on this?
I'm the first to acknowledge I struggle with this. I think everything Donna has said, I often think about different ways that I can do that. And to Tara's point, in diversifying the type of mentors that I have, I recently had a mentor who, spoke with me about in life, you're going to always have emerging challenges and things that occupy your time, and how important it is that you prioritize what's important at that time. And there's going to be different seasons for different things, and all things can't be every season. I think that's one of the things that I'm learning, that, you can care about all things doesn't mean you can do all things all the time. And I do think it's that balance. And one item that I'm currently working on is, streamlining your energy so that the work that you're doing is connected to other work. So you're not always building from ground up, and so you're not always starting, from scratch. And when you do that, that's sometimes more exhausting. So, sometimes it's delegating to other people. Sometimes it's leaning on other people to come in where you can't. And sometimes, I'm sorry, it's saying no. It's just like outright saying, no, my plate is full. I'd love to help. I know someone else that might be interested. Thanks for the invite, but I just can't take anything on. And I think women, especially Black women, have to just start saying more of no. And our communities have to not think that we're less than because we're protecting our own mental health and our own capacity. I think we have to kind of encourage people to do that so that they can grow in wellness. And to Donna's point, give ourselves grace and knowing that it's okay to say no. You're not any less of an achiever if you do say that. But I want to acknowledge, I think all of us on here and one time or another probably struggled that as women getting to where we are now, taking on a lot to get to where we are, but it definitely comes at a sacrifice.
Absolutely. Oh, everything you just said reminds me of reclaiming my time, right? Owning your own peace. And so I know that, Tamika, you also have a little one, a little bit older than mine. How do you manage it?
Yeah, I think that just to go back a little bit, that if you are early in your career, because I'm mid-career, so I feel, and I've been at my company a little bit longer, so I feel like there's a little bit more understanding because, my work has been proved, right? And so I feel like, for those that are early career that are listening in, I think it's important that when you go in and are looking for whatever the right job is for you, especially the newer generation, to ask those questions, like, what is the work environment? What is the work culture? You don't even have to have a child, but you can ask someone who has a child, like, how do you balance this job? And how do they make accommodations for you, right? If you need to go to a parent conference during the day, is someone going to side eye you because you have to go to a parent conference? Or if you need to go take care of a loved one, if you don't have children, is someone, going to look at you the wrong way? And so I think that someone that's, been in the industry for a little while and working for, a little while mid-career, I think it's important that you know how to interview, your employer when you're job searching. And then when you do get there, then, you kind of prove your way, and you can, let people know, like, your boundaries, what you can do, what you can't. And I think the more honest that you can be and letting them know and not try to hide it, because I think sometimes we're working so hard and we're trying to balance and we're trying to hide things. But I think the more that we can be open to let our teams know, hey, you know what, Wednesday afternoon, I'm going to go to parent conferences. And how can we make sure that, people aren't looking at you the wrong way, knowing that the work is going to get done. And so I feel the more you can be honest about it. I know that I'm very honest. If I'm going to parent conferences, I'm going to parent conferences and unavailable. If I'm going on a field trip apple picking, I'm going apple picking, and I'm not trying to hide it because those are my values. So
Absolutely. No, I respect all of the boundaries that we have to set. And really, I'd love the HR perspective from Tara. How do we balance this out when you've been in HR roles what do you tell people, especially women, where we are either extremely honest, like Tamika, right? Telling you, look, my arm is killing me, I'm going to the doctors, or I'm taking my kid, or I'm doing this, right? You try to be incredibly transparent. On the HR side of things, in the DE&I world, where's the balance? How should we be approaching these kinds of situations?
Yeah, from my perspective, and the HR perspective, I suppose, biases and equity can't really hold the same space. So, it's really my job to ensure that the people that I'm working with, the people within the organization, put their biases in check, right? And think differently. And that's ongoing conversation. It's difficult conversation, but at the same time, I also, like Tamika said, I also encourage women, in particular, that you have duties, you have other things, you're holding down family and your career, and be honest. Just be honest about it. It's really funny because it's like when white men say, I'm going to my son's football game at 2:00. They're respected. Their time is very well respected. It's held private. It's like, yes, that's what you. And when women say that, it's a side eye sometimes. So again, from the HR perspective, it's really my role and my job to ensure that I'm building a culture that accepts this, primarily because it's not just mothers. It's really people who are caregivers, period. When you're caring for your family, I've had to care for my parents, and I'm pretty sure I've gone through the same thing in terms of getting those calls in the middle of a meeting saying something's wrong, just like, people who are parents are. So from the HR perspective, it's really about building a culture of inclusion and making sure that biases are checked at the door and that we are equitable in our practices.
100%. I couldn't agree more. If we can stay on that topic for a second, because I'm just going to dig in, right? Ruth, I want your perspective. When we look across different industries, right, we tend to see women or people of color in major DE&I roles. How can we collectively be more inclusive and not assume that only a person of color can fill these roles?
That's always, I would say it's one of my pet peeves when you see some of these particular roles and they're dominated by particular populations. But I would take it a step further. It's sometimes dominated by particular populations who are not qualified, like who do not have certifications, professional training. And that to me is the biggest concern, that we almost don't respect the discourse of diversity, equity, and inclusion, that we value a person's phenotype and their race over their actual ability to apply the knowledge and the application and training of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So for me, I think that's the first starting point. Like when you're putting individuals in this role, are they actually skilled and talented in what they're doing? Can they apply? And does their role only live in HR? Because that to me is also a huge barrier, because it often doesn't connect to policy. It doesn't connect sometimes to funding. And when you have an individual that is working on this type of work and they don't have ability to impact policy, they don't have the ability to identify funding, because sometimes those applications come with time commitments that the current staff that's there doesn't have time to administer. So who's doing it? And so it just becomes one of those other things that are not done. And so I think while it is, making sure that it's not just one types of individuals that are doing this, it's also making sure that the right types of individuals are doing this work and that they're armed with the right resources to do it successfully. Because if not, it really doesn't build the type of inclusion and lasting systemic change that you're looking for.
Agreed. And ladies, stop me if you want to jump in, because I know that you all have amazing perspectives on this stuff. We've talked about it outside of this. And so I'm throwing you questions because I'm just picking your brain about different areas. So forgive me now if I'm bouncing around, but it's all valuable information for our audience and for myself. With Ruth, you saying that, I get approached a lot about, could you give trainings on DE&I? Just because I'm Black doesn't make me the expert. Right? That's the reality of this. That's what we're getting to. And I'll say it for the panel, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you're serious about change, we talked about this on Tuesday night. If you're serious, yes, approach us and we will definitely help you. And not because we might be the only Black woman that you know, but because we care about our community and we want to help you if you're serious. And so, Donna, my question is for you next, right? With all of your background and experience, how have you dealt with the perceptions of stereotypes, particularly with being aggressive, right? I hear it all the time of, well, why are you so angry, right? Because I happen to be Black and I happen to be passionate. How do you deal with it?
I think I've matured in that capacity over time. I think how I would have responded to that statement 20 years ago probably would have sounded a little angry. But I think now, I like to help individuals educate themselves and, explain to me, I'm not quite sure what you mean by that. Help me understand what about my response seems aggressive. And often people will throw words when they're just not interested in what you have to say. And that angry or aggressive is a word that tends to come out. So I'll probe that a little bit. But I also think that once you reach a certain age, and I have reached that certain age, you care less about what people think. And, my proof tends to be in my pudding. And the work stands for itself. So I try not to be bothered by those. And I look at them as teachable moments. And I will politely educate someone, politely and publicly, educate them. And if that involves, moderate embarrassment for the better good, then that might happen. But that is it's a bias. Angry and aggressive, those are words that are very often used for Black women. I had someone, a white male once, use that word aggressive in a performance review for me once, and I challenged it. I said, I'm not aggressive. I'm doing my job, frankly, better than some of my white counterparts. And I'm assertive, I'm proactive, and I'm passionate about what I'm doing, but I'm by no means aggressive. So I think helping people to define that word for you, what does that mean? What do you mean by that? What does that look like? I'm not really sure I understand what you mean by that.
Right, because they may very well mean clear and concise, right? Why are you so clear? Why are you so not mincing your words, right? That's the phrase that I've gotten from others. And so, Tamika, my question to you, you mentioned that you are mid-career. What advice would you give to the non-traditional or mid-career individual who's looking to retool their skills for the future of clean energy?
Yeah, well, I think every skill that we have, no matter what point in our career we are, is transferable. And I think that we just need to communicate that, right? And so oftentimes it's really hard on a resume to talk about or communicate that. But, I truly believe in, as a woman that's wrote a book about networking, that's where we should be networking with all diverse individuals. Because when you are trying to transition into any industry, it's tough. But, the clean energy industry, it's an industry that only has a little bit, almost 30% women. If you look at the clean energy industry and then you look at, so that's 70% males. Then if you look at a sector like energy efficiency, that's 93% white males, right? So how do you get in those types of industry? How can you break barriers? Because you are really breaking barriers if you decide to go into energy efficiency, because there's only 7% of people that are going to look like you. And so that's where I really think that networking comes into it. And also, if you have that time where you can volunteer time or do an internship for the younger generation. And I also think that it's important that, if you're in undergrad or grad school, that you should do internships at different companies so that you can, learn new networks, right? So I think that it's important that we know how to network, and, especially, as Black women, sometimes we like to go where it feels most comfortable for us, right? So if I see Ruth, in a room, I'm going to probably walk over next to Ruth because it's great to, when you see, because I don't see people that look like me often. So I'll walk over to someone that looks like that looks like me. But I think it's great when we can have a diverse network, and not just people, necessarily that look like us. It's great that some, on this panel, that we can bounce ideas off of each other and talk about different work happenings, but it's also great to have a diverse network. And so I think that if anyone is trying to transition, if you're early in your career, mid-career, and you're just trying to break down walls and barriers, you really have to establish your network and attend events like AABE and meet new people, and just, whatever industry or sector you're trying to get into, to really join those networks.
So I love the advice, obviously, in running AABE, right? But I have to ask Ruth, because prior to Eversource, you were working as neighborhood and ethnic liaison for Mayor Walsh, right? And so you made a huge transition. What did you do to get prepared to come into energy, and why energy?
It's what, to me, I think, to me, you hit that right on the head. I networked with people who didn't look like me. I talked with people who didn't think like me, and I was okay having uncomfortable, courageous conversations with individuals. And it allowed, some of individuals in my network to see me beyond what I look like and to value the skill set that I brought to the work that I did. And it was actually someone that within my network that recommended the role to me, transitioning from a liaison to Mayor Walsh to being a manager in the Department of Youth Engagement and Employment. I was working with young adults, and I took a group of young adults to a conference. And this is on the advice of my director. He's like, "Hey, we committed to this. Could you do it?" And I said, "Okay." At that point, I was looking for other opportunities, and I was also changing lifestyle. I think whatever you do needs to also connect with you synergy wise. I was starting to be more sustainable. I was thinking about my world more, being more greener, and I was planting, just out there for all the garden moms out there. And so I started doing a lot more of that. And when I took these young adults to a sustainability conference, I really got connected to cleaner energy. I was like, wow, I feel like this is where I want to head. And so when I started going back into the market and looking for opportunities, actually, this was the only role in clean energy I applied for. I applied for a lot of others, and I got to final interviews and offers, and none of them stuck. I was just like, I don't feel like that's my move. Like, at my age, you're not just jumping. It has to mean something. And so I waited on it, and it was it was someone within my network that I mentioned, and he said, "Hey, I've heard of this opportunity. I think it fits you really well. You should look at it." And I did, and I applied, and I was able to secure this role. But to Tamika's point, it's not that many people of color in these types of role and this level of leadership. It's not. And I do think that it does have an impact on how you move in the industry. But I also think, building those relationships in your work is so important. Having people, a mentor calls champion, she calls it champion, when you're not around, validating the work that you're doing and, promoting you in your absence. And I think that goes a long way. I do that for others. I share that, and I give that level of, investment in others. And I appreciate those that do that for me too. Because I think you need to be able to do that. I think it goes right back into networking. It is networking that got me where I am.
Fair. Tara, your story is like crazy to me, because electrical engineer, you have a JD, you've been in DE&I, now you've pivoted to mentorship. How in the world did this happen? Like, what is in you that says, basically, I can do anything? Is it the natural problem solver in you? How does this happen?
Yeah, I love a good challenge. And that's really the story I tell. I love solving problems. And yes, my career trajectory has not been linear by any means. I have practiced as an electrical engineer. I have my JD. I've worked at major law firms. I went back into engineering because it truly is my first love, I think. And from there, went into procurement actually, and supplier diversity, which is typically my exposure. That was my true exposure to DEI on the supply chain side, and then just kind of migrated on the human capital side and transferred those skills from supply chain to human capital. It's when I talk to people within organizations, the one thing I tell them is, really learn other parts of the organization. Oftentimes, especially in DEI or even supplier diversity, we get pigeonholed. And, my background, my strongest background is in power systems, is in weapons and communication systems, is in I managed the Logan Airport the International Terminal construction project. There's things that I've done, but here's the thing: when you're pigeonholed in these organizations, you're not taken seriously. I've been at an organization where I have put forth improvement plans, if you will, for different things that are going on. And it was just kind of, like, oh yeah, that's great. She's the diversity person. What does she know? And that's the dangerous part. I know a lot, I know exactly what you're talking about when you're talking, although I'm not sitting here saying anything. So, I want to encourage, again, this is a part of my job in HR, and why I'm so passionate is because now I'm working from the other angle, where I don't want people to have to push up and push out and spread their wings and try to prove themselves, but rather I want the culture to be such that we're digging into who they are. We're digging into their experiences, and we're trying to leverage the knowledge. I mean, we're hiring them, we're paying them, right? We want to try to leverage them as much as we can in different areas of the organization. So, for me, I feel like I'm sitting in a place where I can really build cultures to better accept all of us, all of our knowledge, and leverage it to make these corporations and these companies and these organizations better organizations.
Absolutely. And so I want to stick with that because obviously you've made some major career changes, and this is true of many of you here on the panel. And so I have to ask her, what were, I would say, triggers? What was the moment where you said, okay, I'm going to make this move from electrical to go back and get my JD? Like, what were you up at 2 a.m. thinking about your next move? Like, is it, deliberate that you were going to be incredibly strategic about all the aspects of your career? Or is it luck? Is it a tap on the shoulder? What happens?
I think it was all of those things. There are times where, I was just exposed to something new, and it created a passion, and I wanted to know more and learn more. So I did more to do that. I talked to the right people. I networked, as Ruth said. So part of it was that. Some of it was tapping on the shoulder and saying, someone actually noticing that, I might be able to help in different areas. And then sometimes it was just, I was no longer growing in that field, or not that field, but at that company, in that position, or at that organization. So oftentimes when I hit a wall, I feel like the work that I'm doing is not being, I guess, no one's listening, and no one wants to listen, and they just want to do things the way that they've been doing it all along. And, that's not why I was hired for any position. I'm always being hired, you're hiring me, and I say that in my interview. If you want someone who's just going to go with the status quo, I am not the one. Please go with your other candidate. I'm not that person. But if you want change, if you want to create change, then, let's do this. So when I feel like I've hit a wall, then it's generally, time to move on.
Wave maker. I love it. I love it. Donna, I have to ask you, because I'm sure people on this call are like, she's Secretariat Director of Health and Human Services. And what they may not know is that you were in somewhat of the same role over HR and diversity for the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs. What was your trigger just to make the switch?
Yeah, a lot of the things that Tara said ring true for me. I'm not someone that is interested in just kind of going through motions or tokenism or symbolism, and just kind of having someone in a role to say that we have someone in a role so we can check a box. I really am interested in making change, and that's really what I'm passionate about. And that's always been a thread in the work that I've done, whether it's been HR, I've been in a million different industries. And the reason that I move around from one role to another is I like to grow, I like to make change, and outgrow something, then it's, for me, it's time to kind of go and do something else. I also think that it's important to be in an environment where you're recognized for your work and your capabilities. And that doesn't always happen. So, you know, I will give things time, and if there's an opportunity to kind of shine, and where my fabulosity is not lost, then I'll go, and I will explore. I mean, I think my role at EEA was great. EEA is a much smaller secretariat. Health and Human Services is about 4 times the size. I probably have 10 times the staff, and I'm able to make a lot more change. And I'm in an environment in this role, and this is no disrespect to EEA, where you know, the leadership is also interested in change. And I think that's really critical. If you're in a role, especially when you're in the DEI space, if you're in a role and you don't have support from a leadership perspective, and if the point of view is that it's your job to, as the DEI person, to kind of make things happen, then you're not going to be successful, because no one individual or no one small group of individuals is going to be able to create systemic change or cultural change or programmatic change. So it does require a number of different individuals. And I also think something else that Tara said that rang true with me is, you know, having the experience of doing other things and bringing in those transferable skills that Tamika was talking about, that apply. You know, I have a great team, and I have individuals, especially my deputy has a great deal of DEI program and equity experience. But, you know, there's also something to be said about knowing how to get things done. And you can have the best ideas, and if you can't navigate an organization, and if you don't know how to go about getting things done, it's difficult to make change happen. So those types of partnerships, whether it's on your own team or it's in a network, are really important. So, you know, find yourself in a space where you can thrive, where you can be comfortable being yourself. Where I can have candid conversations about anything about race with my boss, similar to the conversations that I might have with individuals on this panel. I can be candid about the work that I'm trying to do and what those barriers are. I think that it's necessary to be in that space and not be in an environment where people are not open, or people are too busy worrying about being comfortable, you know, rather than doing what needs to be done to make the appropriate change. I'll end it there.
Tamika, I was coming to you next anyway. So jump in, because I know you have so much to say. And then I have questions about where we're going.
I just wanted to say, you know, I don't think any job is going to 100% match everything that you want to do, right? So I think it's important that, you know, even though we are working, you know, for companies, that if you have that entrepreneurial spirit as well, that if there's a, you know, maybe you like 90% of your job, and, you know, because I don't think, unless someone wants to chime in about it, but I don't think there's a job that's going to meet 100% of what you want to do, unless you are specifically working for yourself 100% of the time, right? There's always things that we have to put up with, politics, whatever it is in your company. But I do want to encourage, you know, anyone who's on this call to, you know, if you're in that position and it's not meeting 100% of your need, because sometimes I don't think the grass is always greener on the other side, but to create your own opportunities. You know, if it's something to start your own nonprofit, whether it's in clean energy, you know, answering a need or whatever it is. But I think it's important that we don't just rely on a company to try to fulfill our needs and to support our career or whatever it is. And so I always like to challenge people that, because the way that I got into, you know, writing some books and putting some curriculum out there was just because I felt that, you know, maybe my job couldn't support the book writing or me speaking more, you know, whatever it encompassed. So I also think it's important that whatever that you are doing, that, you know, no job is going to 100% maybe meet everything that you want. And if it doesn't, like, think of something where you can establish that nonprofit. Like I know Ruth does amazing things with women, like for women, you know, on her own that maybe she couldn't do with Eversource, right? So the same thing for you, Shalaya, too. Like I know that you work with youth on the side, you know, maybe that, you know, things that you couldn't do, you know, with National Grid. So I always say, yes, you know, we're going to have different times in our career and transitions and partnerships, but I just, you know, I don't think it's fair that we can always think that a job is going to meet us 100%, that, you know, we can go out and establish our own opportunities too. You know, don't wait for a company to create opportunities for you, like go out on your own and create those opportunities.
Absolutely. It's sort of unrealistic, right? For an employer to match you to do everything that you possibly want to do.
Yeah.
And so go ahead, Donna.
I was just going to say, I think I love everything that Tamika said, but I also think that one of the takeaways from that is understanding what it is that you want. And I think sometimes that takes time, really understanding what you want to do. You know, we go to school or we don't go to school, or we find ourselves in a job and we think this is really what we want to do until we're in it. And then we realize, oh, I'm not sure I'm feeling this. Maybe I like this part of it, but I don't like that part of it. So it's somewhat of an evolution, but I think as you go and you transition in your roles and you go in your career, it's really important to take note and audit yourself and think of things that I really enjoy in this job. And I agree with you, Tamika, there's always going to be something that isn't your favorite thing to do, that you might have to do if you're working for someone else. But understand what those things are so that when an opportunity presents itself, that might not be something that you ever envisioned for yourself, you can recognize it and be able to take advantage of it. It's really knowing what is really, really important.
Agreed. You finished my statement. Thank you, Donna.
But Ruth has more to add to it.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna agree with Donna and Tamika. I also think it's important to know your why. Why are you doing the work that you're doing? Sometimes we land in space because other people tell us that I think you do really well at that, or, you know, you've got these kinds of skills. I know somebody in that department. I know someone doing that type of work, and we take it on. But you're going to work and it's a space you're working 40 plus hours a week. You need to have your why. Like, why do you get up every day and go to this space? It can't just be financially. While that is, you know, what you take home, that can't be why you show up. And I think having that why helps sustain you when you're doing work that is different. And I think, Donna, I'm an example of that, someone who went into a field that was completely different than what I was doing before. And I'm having to learn a massive amount of information, often in very short periods of time. And that requires, you know, building a lot of relationships, because at the end of the day, I have my why. And I think also too, sometimes you're hired and the company tells you, like, this is what the role is, right? These are the goals of the role, but you have to create your own goals too. You have to have your own why too. You have to have your own contributions you want to leave with the role. When you move on, everyone's like, this person did this. Like, this was their investment. They reached, you know, they gave the deliverables of the role, but they went above and beyond and left that additional components because it mattered to them. And I think that shifts the culture of the work. It allows the work to evolve, to go beyond just, you know, the monetary exchange between you and an employer. Like, not having that why really makes it difficult. And I know earlier this was asked, like, what's that moment and you realize you want to leave? To me, it's when I no longer feel valuable. I no longer see, like, I'm no longer contributing to the work. I'm not helping it evolve. And I'm a big supporter of learning. So if I'm not learning anything, I'm gone. I'm just gone, because my spirit is only here for a certain period of time, and I want to learn and I want to grow, and I have to be in a space that's multifaceted where I can do that. Like I said before, there's different seasons for different things, and some certain seasons you'll learn a particular item, and then others you'll learn other components. But if you're in a space where you're not getting that, you're not able to grow and thrive, and you don't know your why, it does make it challenging to stay in that role. And I think many of those things happened to me that triggered me leaving. But yeah, when I meet with young adults, I'm doing mentorship. I'm like, why? What makes you happy? What do you want to do every day right now? And how do you find skills that exist and add that and bring those contributions to the workforce? I just think that's really important, and it just feeds the human spirit.
Ruth, you brought us back to mentorship, which is a huge component to some of our success, right? So Tara, I have to ask you, how do we measure within organizations the success of mentorship programs? Because sometimes we throw them up there and we say, okay, mentors are available. And so many don't know how to be a mentee, and nor do they know how to be a mentor, right? So how do we measure the success?
Yeah, so, the organization that I do work for, Mentor, is not a direct service organization, and we do exactly that. We provide the tools and resources for people to really build inclusive cultures, to cultivate the cultures so that, there is a mentoring mindset and behaviors within the organization. But drawing from, I guess, my own personal experience, really the measure of success are trust, respect, and when both the mentor and the mentee are getting value from the relationship. It's not a one direction relationship. And if one, especially in organizations, you believe, oh, let's pair this person with somebody high up, right? And if that person in that senior level position is not learning anything from that mentee, then that is not a valuable relationship. I think those are three very key, and there's many more, but those are three very key measures of success. And if anyone is looking for any additional information, they can go on mentoring.org. That's what we do. We provide free, information on recruitment, screening, training, matching, monitoring, supporting the relationship in many different facets. We have supplemental information on different populations, the LGBTQ community, and how do you, mentor there. So there's a lot of information out there, but it really is important within the organization to try to build that mentoring mindset and to increase youth voice, especially in these organizations have been around for, many of them have been around for so long. And many of them also believe, hey, we got you here, we're doing what we've been doing to get you here, but that does not mean that you're going to be successful moving forward, especially with everything's changing. So it's very important to bring youth voice to the table as well.
I love it. So I again, you keep bringing it up with young people and different diverse communities. I'm now teaching. You all know this, right? So I have a group of students. Some of them are on the line, and they'll have many, many questions tomorrow about this conversation, or so I hope. So my question to you all is, what are you seeing with younger folks that we're hiring? Is it true that generation is so different that's coming into our workspaces? Or is that just something that we keep hearing? Is it true?
Well, first of all, I think, they have the availability of more information, right? I wish I had all of these different resources to be able to, tap into and know in a split second what the answer to my question might be, right? Like they have so many resources and there's so much information out there for them. So I think, that's one thing. They're smarter than we ever were at the age that we were,
That is debatable. That is debatable.
I guess, when you're a mother, sometimes you're like, third grade math, what? You want me to help you with that? What is this, right? I did this in high school. What is this? But I think they're learning a lot faster than we ever were. I also believe they're fearless. There are many of them that they ask for what they want. I mean, it's amazing, the organization that I work for and being kind of the CHRO, if you will, and the head of people, the things they ask me for. I mean, I just sit there and I'm like, I can't even believe you asked what? Like, but at the same time, I'm like, wow, man, I admire them for asking for what they want. Like, so I think in terms of those two things, yeah, it's different. It's different.
It's definitely different. Ruth, I know that you're going to have some buy-in because with your background, dealing with young people, dealing with communities and having exposure to the ethnic backgrounds and the culture change, right? I know you being born in Haiti, coming to this country, growing up in Florida, and then being here in New England. What differences are you seeing, if any, with our young people, especially those coming into the workforce?
I am with Tara on this. They're different. I'm not gonna lie to you. I am like in awe majority of the time. Like, wow, you're so smart. And at that age, I was not thinking about that. But a lot of it was just the lack of access to information. Like I didn't know what I didn't know. And I have a mentee, and she's much younger than me, and she is fearless. I mean, she's strong in her conviction and her position, and I empower her to do so. And I also I encourage you to do that, but to be thoughtful though, to be thoughtful of how she do that. That's the one challenge I do have with the younger generation is like expedited, immediate gratification, and sometimes that becomes so short term and short lived that you keep seeking the next thing that you devalue what's actually in front of you and with the possibilities of what's in front of you. They just sometimes don't see that because immediately you're leaving this life that's sometimes solely based on social media. I'm not going to lie about that. But when we were talking about the young adult, them going into the workforce, just thinking about our work in energy efficiency, it's in my previous work and working with diverse populations, it's helped me to think of the workforce differently, making sure that we have, thinking through like diverse contractors, bilingual programs, reaching out, working with diverse populations, and thinking about the young adult experience and being honest about not all young adults are trying to get a 4-year degree. That's just the reality. And people sometimes are struggling with that, but they're not. They're learning it in their minds, depending on the degree, of course. YouTube videos, researching, and they're sometimes coming in the spaces without the education, they're implementing it much faster. And so I like to be mindful of that as we think about like certification programs, thinking through like, yeah, if they're not going to be at a 4-year college, how do we build relationships with high schools, and how do we get career exploration in at a young age, and how do we make certification programs instead of 6 months or a year to 2 to 3 months so they can be done, and how do we scale? Because I do think that there's starting to be there's a overall disparity in the workforce where you have the older population that's aging out, and you have the younger population that are coming in, but they're not going into these same fields. They're not moving the same way. So it's not like, oh, let's just promote and we'll get them into these roles. They're like, no. To what Tara said, they're like, so you have no work-life balance? It's a no for me. I've had young adults when at an interview say like, so what's your company culture? So do you practice X, Y, and Z? And I'm like Googling, what is that? Like, I've never even heard of that. And so me going back to my previous show, my director saying, we don't have these things, and these sound like they're important. And so I think young adults really do teach you, if you're willing to listen, of what's to come in the future. And I think there's parts of it we do need to start listening to, that we need to start incorporating if we want them to go into some of these traditional fields. Because as Tamika's saying, I think I see there's a huge uptick in entrepreneurship from this particular population. And I think it's part of why you're looking everywhere and you're seeing we hire signs, and people are not going into these jobs. The salaries for them are not right. The work-life balance is not right. The company culture is not right. And because of that, this younger generation too is huge on mental health. And I love it. As someone who wish I grew up with more of that around me, and feeling like a black sheep when I'm talking about anxiety, HDAT, PTSD, childhood trauma, hearing so much of my community deny that, hearing young adults, walking into it in a very brave way and saying, yes, these are real issues and we should address them. I feel really encouraged to know that we have them in our future. I do think, to Tara's point, mentorship is needed. A lot of it is needed because they have the tools in a much quicker and faster way, and they need support from the older population and how to properly implement them so they can have a healthy and prosperous life.
Fair. I'm seeing it at a much younger age. And of course, I'm trying to be the mind reader and the future teller to see where these kids will end up and what industries that they're going in. Obviously, I'm pushing for clean energy. And then I look to someone like Tamika, who's dealing with kids that are trying to pursue 4-year degrees and going into internship opportunities. Tamika, what has been your experience with young people and their success or failures within these internship programs? And what are we doing to make sure we have more applicants and just more applicants of color, right? We got to balance the scale somehow.
Yeah, so that's something that, I mean, in my job, I work on all the time. I think that Ruth brought out, she talked about the generation. There's no more I can say about the new generation.
Mhm.
But, you know, one thing is that if they do want to be in this space, like you said, you have to have mentoring, because while they are in that microwave society and the Google society, you know, there is a little bit of culture that they still need to learn about, right? And there is, you know, a little bit of background, because I think with this generation, they will say to you, you know, if you offend them the wrong way, you know, they'll quit on you and they'll go work for Uber, because you can go, you know what I mean? It's like so simple. They'll leave you and they'll be working because they don't need you, you know? And so I think that that mentoring piece is important, because just to teach them, you know, yeah, you can go work for Uber today, but you're going to miss out on some great opportunities, you know, in this space, and some great economics sustainability, because you're going to, you know, one day you're going to maybe want to open your own business or have a family or have to take care of a mother or a dad, and you're going to need a more, you know, sustainable income. And so, yeah, internships, I look at, you know, the internships, and unfortunately in my industry, because we do have disparities, you know, racial disparities, I have to educate the employers at the same time. It's not just educating the students, but it's educating the employers on how to work with diverse communities, because we think that just because someone is our age, and, you know, that they know how to work with diverse networks, and they don't. So for me, it's like, it's double-sided. I have to talk to the employer about, this is how, you know, you're going to treat them equitable, like just like your other interns. And then you talk to the students, these are the challenges that you are going to face in the workplace, and you're going to have probably some uncomfortable conversations, and what that's like. A lot of things that I try to incorporate. This summer we ran, Mass EC ran a targeted internship program, and we asked our training providers to speak with the students about the different challenges that they're going to face, and not just from a race perspective, you know, it's from a male-female perspective, because it's hard to go into an industry, as I said, where 93%, if you go into energy efficiency, you're probably not going to see someone that looks like you if you're minority. But then if I'm a woman, I'm not going to see any woman around me, and then that's a culture shock, right? And so depending on where you come from. So for me, it's just making sure that if our students, the generation wants those opportunities, that I'm in the background kind of like shepherding them on how they should act when they get there, and some of the challenges they face. Because I think all of us can say there's different days that we have wanted to quit, you know, based on what someone has said to us, based on the way someone has treated us, but we really have persevered, right? And I think sometimes the new generation, you know, as I said, they'll leave you. They don't want to persevere. They don't want to put up with that. But that really is what has made us who we are. And so I don't want anyone to have to go through a bad work experience or a bad internship experience. But at the same time, I don't want you just to give up because someone, you know, might have looked at you, you know, the wrong way, you know, or misinterpreted what you said or whatever it is. I want this generation to stick it out a little bit, you know, like, you know, and again, I don't want anyone to be in a bad internship or a bad employer, but I think it's important that they are able to know like when it's time to go, and not immediately, you know, and when it's time to go in a few months or whatever it is. But this generation will just leave you. I mean, if I say something to an intern or fellow that they don't like, and maybe they just misinterpret me, I know they are leaving me. They're saying, bye, I'm not putting up with you. And I just want them to, you know, learn about conflict resolution. And that's where we gain our experience, right? And Donna mentioned that, you know, the way she probably would have answered you when she was 20 is a lot different than the way she would answer you today. And that is because of, you know, she's matured. And sometimes when we give up so easy because we know that we'll just leave and I'll just go work for Uber or whatever it is, you don't gain that maturity. So.
Okay.
Uh,
Bruce.
A lot of just
I
said it.
was, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, Ruth.
No, I was
I-
just gonna, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just going to add to what Tamika was saying. I think it's also about companies making it okay for employees to not feel like they are operating just in this top-down experience where they can't ask questions and they can't push back when something doesn't make sense. And I think young adults don't want to be in that space, so they immediately will leave. And I had my mentor who actually was working with a group of like Black prolific leaders in our community, and she stopped engaging with them because she said, I felt like I wasn't heard. I felt like I was being exploited for my talent because I was young and I could use technology. I don't really think they wanted to incorporate any of my ideas. And I had to train her on how do you push back without it being confrontational? How do you ask questions? So it's about you trying to learn, because there's a knowledge gap between the population. She was just talking to individuals that were in their 60s and she was like 20. And so I was like, you got a 40-something year difference. There's a lot of years of experience that are different there. And there's a way that you should be trained in asking questions where, yes, the individual may not immediately agree with everything that you're saying, but they can see that you're trying to learn. And there's a way to get there that where you can actually quantify, and that when you do leave and say like, I'm leaving because I've asked these following questions, I've made these following requests, and I feel like you're not willing to do X, Y, and Z because of that. Like, this is no longer a good fit for me. And then you leave with that understanding. But I also think like not doing that doesn't educate the workforce, the employer, the group, whatever, the individual, to understand that these things are important. So to your point, Tamika, when they just leave, it doesn't educate the workforce, doesn't educate those employers. They just think that population doesn't want to work and they just don't care about it. But that's not the reality. You haven't checked them. And I think they need to do more of that in a more intentional and critical way.
Donna, you were jumping in.
I mean, Ruth really said it. I think,
There it is.
young people to really understand at times, and I don't mean to discount young people, but younger generation of employees, they do bring a lot, but there's still something to gain. And sometimes it's through mentorship or other partnerships where you can help identify what those opportunities or what those avenues are, which is really what Ruth just said, kind of highlighting, yes, you're bringing A, B, and C, but in order to really do what you want to do, whether you're going to be an entrepreneur, whether you're going to grow in the industry or what have you, you need a full complement of skills. And some of that takes time. And I do think the social interaction is really where I think some of the individuals of the forthcoming generation can benefit, and really understanding how to navigate in a business environment, how to have those conversations that are not always optimal, how to kind of push back to Ruth's point, how to make your case, how to propose change, all of those different things, and how to deal with difficult individuals, how to sustain in an environment that maybe doesn't respect you or value you, how to grow from that, how to come out of that for the better. So I think those are things that that individuals can gain within an organization, as well as what they bring to the table. So I think sometimes we need to highlight that for young people. I know I highlight those things for my daughter. I'm not sure she listens all the time, but Mama says.
That's a different story whether they listen. Tamika, you said a little earlier about 93% of our population in terms of the clean energy space is not going to look like this panel, right? And you may not always find yourself with folks around you that look like you and mirror your values and your culture. My question to you, this sort of came to me because Ruth is not from here, and we've had discussions about Boston in particular not being friendly to people of color, right? But the tenfold to that is really with women of color, how can we be more supportive? And with our allies, how can they support us? So I'll start with you, but this is really a question for all of you.
Sure. I mean, I think that women can support women. First is that we have to remember that we all have talents and skills, and not to be threatened, by anyone else's talent and skills. And I think that the more that if you do see someone in an industry that, I haven't met anyone per se in my industry that would not sit down and talk with me if I had a question. And I think that that's important, that we have to start with ourselves and just make sure that we are open, because if we're not open, then the same energy, is not going to be reciprocated. So I think that if I'm giving off a certain type of energy and then I feel someone else has bad energy, I know how to kind of say, okay, nope, let's move on to the next person. And I think once you find those people in your life, is to stick with them. Not saying that you have to call each other, every day, but I think having, the network, developing your network, I think that one reason why that I did join AABE, because I wanted to be intentional to find people that looked like me, that I could talk with, and maybe, bounce different ideas off of. And so I think that we as women just have to learn how to support each other more. And unfortunately, because, there's not a lot of women that are in the CEO space or the C-suite space, or, CEOs on the Fortune 500 companies, sometimes it causes us to be closed because we haven't seen, a woman that looks like us and how they serve as leaders and how they treat people. And so when you do find those people, I think it's important to know how much of a gem they are, right? And that you keep in touch with them, they keep in touch with you, and just to really have your own inner circle, as I call it. I've worked in politics before, and before you run for anything, you have an inner circle, right? And that's the people that you can really confide in. And so I think that we all need to be able to, in our work environments, or in our industry, to have an inner circle. And that may only be 2 people, and that's okay. But when you can bounce different ideas off of people, so that if something really bad happened to me today, I'm not just gonna kind of lash out at it. I might call Ruth and say, well, what do you think about this? And then Ruth can kind of like talk me down and coach me down, or coach me to what, we say. So I know it's difficult being a woman of color in this space, but when you do find your allies, right? When you do find your allies, it's important that you keep them, and not just call them when it's good for you. Call them to say, hey, we haven't talked in a while. How is it going for you? Don't just call someone because you have an issue or a problem that day. And I think we just have to do more of that, to check up on each other, right? And when you check up on each other, that's how you develop your inner circle, and you can depend on your inner circle. So I think that, when you do find gems out there, that you keep them in your network and you check up on them, and you can then start to bounce off ideas. And that's just building relationships, right? And not feeling, because I think sometimes we can feel threatened, and it's not even that someone has done to us, it's just the things that we've gone through in life, right? Because I know that's been me sometimes. So I think that when you find gems that support you, stick with them, and build your own relationship network.
Donna has feedback, so jump in, and then I have to get perspective at Donna's level, Tara's level. Can you really, really support others at your level, other women that are your competition, right? Like, can you do that? Donna, what are your thoughts?
Really interesting. I don't see it as competition, one. So I think that's a really interesting word. Really what I was going to say is that I think for too long, there has been only one, right? So if you're a woman of color in an organization, you're the one that gets a break. There's only going to be one. They're not going to let there be another one. So people have to hold on tight to what they have. So some people come at those relationships with that dynamic, and they're not open. They're not interested. They don't want to engage. They don't want that kind of partnership. So it is what it is. But from my point of view, why would you not? Why would you not want to help others grow and thrive, and share information and learn from other individuals, and have that type of partnership? I always want to see women of color do better. I always want to hire women of color. I want to help promote women of color. I want to learn and work with and work for women of color. So for me, it's always just been just really interesting to have that understanding. I lived in another state for a little while, and it was very much that kind of closed off environment. And there wasn't the type of sisterhood is not the word that I want to use, but I can't think of another one. There was
Sisterhood is fine. Sisterhood is good.
that, we might experience on a panel like this or in other conversations. And I think it's really unfortunate because really it's we're becoming part of the system in that instance that is keeping people out. And I don't ever want to be part of that system in terms of sustaining that system. I want to be part of changing that system.
Absolutely. Wait, we have questions from the audience and I don't want to miss out. And I know that we have about 10 minutes left. And so a student asked, what do you think that us students can do to help in the change for cleaner energy?
That for me or Ruth or whoever?
Anybody?
I mean, I think that, as a student wise, I think that more students are in tune to sustainability, right? And so I think it's making sure that not just for the industry, but for our community, because I think that, in the past, depending on what community you've lived in or worked in, I think it's important that, it's great if you have the talent and skills to give to your industry, but I also think that we need to watch out for our community as well, especially as I say this as a Black woman, because when you look at in clean energy, the reason why we're such proponents of clean energy, because if you go into traditional, minority neighborhoods, you look at the asthma levels, right? And this is where Health and Human Services comes in, right? Because this is what you have to hear about. I don't want to be in a community where the asthma level is different or, the health disparity is different because, there's 100 buses going down the street, so I think it's more, it's about in this industry because I want to make a change, for everyone, but more specifically for, communities of color, for people that look like me. I want to make a change for them. If they want to join the industry, I want it to be a career pathway that they know that this is a great economic sustainable pathway for them, depending on what sector they go into. But also it's really about the community. I have children, I have nieces, nephews. If you don't have children, you have family members and you want their health, right, to be the best for the next generation as well. And so I think that as students, it's just really being aware and all of us playing our part,
Absolutely. I think there's a lot they can do, small bites, right? Recycling is fundamental, something that you can do in your home. For me, when I was younger, it was my parents saying, I don't own the light company, turn the light off, right? That's the truth. I know you all are laughing, but it's still true. I still tell my daughter, we do not own National Grid, turn that light off, right? Tara, I see that you've unmuted yourself. Tell me more.
Yeah, I could just say learn. Continue to learn about environmental social governance. Continue to learn about climate. Continue climate change. Continue to learn about environmental and energy justice. Continue to learn about these things. The history of why we even have this terminology today. Why does there have to be any justice as it relates to energy or environment or climate or any of these things? Like, and the history tells the story. From there, I'm sure within every child's background, within every adult's background, they have, experienced these injustices somewhere along the way. And speak from that point of view when you are going out there, speak from that passion to try to change the world. I mean, it rests on your shoulders. And so that's the advice that I would give, is just learn as much as you can.
Absolutely. So this question, I'm going to do a hand raise. If you have ever experienced racism in an energy related role. Yes, if you have, hand. So that was from another student, right? And that racism is quite real, right? In this climate, in this culture, what is your why to keep going when you are seeing day to day so many atrocities, particularly within our culture? Tara, what is your why?
Wow. I would love time to think about that, in all honesty, because that is a very important question. But, my passion drives me. My history drives me. The fact that I know with, what my ancestors have gone through, my mother, my father, my grandmother, grandfather, like it continues to drive me forward to do better, be better, show better, and hopefully influence others to be better. So for me, that's what drives me every day. I want to live in this world, and I deserve the same privileges. And in knowing that, then I just continue to move forward.
Such a concise answer in that short span of time to actually respond with such heartfelt emotion behind it. And so I'm going to open that same question to Ruth, Tamika, and Donna. What is your why? Tamika.
So I think I have a two-part question on why. The first reason why is because I work for an organization that is funded by ratepayers. And when I say ratepayers, it is funded by the richest ratepayer in Massachusetts, as well as the poorest ratepayer, right? In Massachusetts, or someone that is in poverty still has to pay, into that fund based on their light bill. And knowing that, then why wouldn't I want to bring opportunities to all people or to minority, individuals, because they deserve the same opportunities that everyone gets, right? And so for me, when I'm doing programming and it's around minorities, or around anyone, because I want this to be an equal, equitable industry. And so for me, it's we are all paying into this fund, by ratepayers, and no one asks like what's your salary or how you pay your light bill to give to Massachusetts Clean Energy Center. So I think that's the first part of it, is that we're funded by ratepayers, and the second part for me is that, my parents provided a way for me. And the way I look at it is I am one generation away from poverty, right? Because my parents were raised in poverty. So to listen to their stories and the things that they faced, and now that they've given me an opportunity, well, I want to be that to someone else, right? I want to make sure that our Black and Brown, individuals have that opportunity. And so for me, I know who I am, and I know I'm one generation away from poverty, and I can never believe or think that I arrived. No matter how successful I am, I will never believe that I've arrived, but I know that I can help other people, so that they can also have economic sustainable pathways for their families or whatever it is. So I just have that inside of me where I want to help others to get to where I am. And if they go forward, advance, great. But I want to at least, let's all start from the same ground,
Thank you, Tamika. Donna.
It's such a big question. I mean, I think if you asked me that question tomorrow, I might have a slightly different answer. But I think at the core, my passion really is around, betterment of individuals such as myself. There's, I think Ruth said something earlier about, not knowing what you didn't know, or not having a certain lens or avenue early on. And certainly there's a lot that I didn't know, and I wish I had certain information when I was coming up. So I think I have an obligation to try to help other people navigate and create equity and call out inequity when I see it, when I recognize it. Because I think, unfortunately, some of it is so entrenched in our day-to-day that we don't necessarily see it. I think Tara was talking about energy justice and environmental justice. Some of these systems and structures are set up in such a way that we don't even think about it anymore. We don't realize, or some folks don't realize that what they're experiencing is an inequity. So I think it's shining a light on that and trying to help people. I really, every role that I've had throughout my career, whether it's been an HR role or DEI role, has really been how do I improve the process? How do I improve the way we do things, and how do I create opportunities for other people, particularly people that look like me? So that really for me is the why.
Thank you, Donna. Ruth, close us out. What is your why?
Similar to Donna, I think depending on what project I'm working on, the why might shift a bit because you get passionate about what you're doing at that time. To me, it's just the inherent disenfranchisement that has happened to the BIPOC community in this country. As an Africana studies major and a women's studies major undergrad, I used to get told, what are you gonna do with them degrees? You know, studying history, like how far is that gonna get you? And doing the work that I'm doing now, I'm just so thrilled that this is what I studied and that my work is about equity. And when I think about energy efficiency, similar to what Tamika says, like my role and my work is funded by ratepayers. That means regular customers who pay for their utility. They're funding my job. And similar as when I was in a government role, I took that serious. I take this just as serious as where I am now. Especially when I think about the workforce and clean energy education, I think about the percentage of Black people who do not own homes. And if you do not own a home, what is the likelihood that you understand the way a furnace works, the way that the type of lighting to have in your home, white windows and homes need to be insulated. And I think about how that further takes a family away from clean energy. And if that family is an environmental justice community and that school is underfunded, what's the likelihood they're getting clean energy education at school? They're not. So what's the likelihood that they're going to know when they should have access to clean energy and what it looks like to pay and what it looks like to not have a lower energy burden? For me, I take that very serious. I think about, the higher someone's energy burden is, the less money they have to do the things that they need to do for themselves, like pull themselves out of poverty. And so I take that, for me, I take that serious. And my why in doing this at times requires that, you're brave, that you say things that, others are not going to want to hear, and that you're okay owning that space of the person that's going to bear the news that others are not excited about, because you want others to be seen and you want others to be received. And it can't always be the same people in the same spaces. And so for me, that's my why, is thinking about, growing up in poverty and my parents not having any English, and in many ways they were exploited because of that. And now, I have a responsibility to think about their experience and the experience of others that may not think or look like me, but they're receiving a level of discriminatory practices, or they are in a system that doesn't recognize their challenges and the barriers that exist in their lives, and that's not valued. And to me, that's part of why I do my work, is to build more inclusion around clean energy, to build diversity in not just the faces, but the voices and the experiences in clean energy, so that it becomes something more practical and more relatable, because I think there's a lot of technical language in this work that keeps people from engaging, and we have to change that. And the only way to do that is to make it something that's easier for someone to understand, easier to communicate socially, and to prioritize outside of just turning off that light, understanding where that light comes from, right? And what it does to your home, and to Tamika's point, how, in the year of COVID, how having challenges with respiratory issues really can be a huge impact on your life when you live in environmental justice communities. And so for me, I think I continue to do this work, thinking about all of those different vantage points, some that relate to me and some that don't, and not forgetting them when I'm in those spaces and policies are being made.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Ruth said the C word. I promised myself that I wasn't going to say it, the COVID word, right? But thank you to each of you ladies. Genuinely appreciated. For those that are on the call tonight, please know that you will get an email. All of these women are in hiring positions. We have some great job opportunities that you will get an email tomorrow, along with the recording of this. Please share it with those that should be part of this conversation. If you're interested in joining AABE, please visit our website. You can go to aabe.org, or you can visit greaterbostonaabe.org. If you have any other questions, follow up with me. I think everybody knows how to get in touch with me. I'm on social media everywhere. You can find me, Shalea Morissette. This is an amazing conversation that we will continue, hopefully in person sometime soon. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.